the Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Hey, we're in the middle of another ski conversation here. Mike, coming off the slopes we talked about on Tuesday. Mark, what happened to your son this weekend?
Yeah, he broke his wrist, but he's not a skier; he's a snowboarder. So we're like, so he's had a nice fall, but at least he was going for a big jump. So it's not that he's not good; it's he's trying to be too brave. So he's 15, and that's what you do at 15, I guess.
They bounce back quick.
They do.
Yeah. I'm glad you only have ski accidents once every 20 years, so you got to teach him that. So that's good.
That's right. His next one's at 35. So.
Well, welcome everyone back to the Bliss Business Podcast. I'm with my co-hosts today, Mike and Tulio. Today, we're excited to welcome back a returning guest, a friend of the show, you could say now. Someone who's inspired our listeners before with insights on high performance in business. And in his last appearance, we talked about critical habits of high performers. And today we're shifting the focus a little bit, but related to something equally important, and a theme we've been diving into a bit more lately is, how businesses can balance profit with social responsibility. Can companies thrive while doing good? And what does it take to integrate purpose into business strategy without sacrificing financial performance? Mike, why don't you reintroduce our guest today?
Yeah, Stephen, my pleasure. Absolutely. So as was mentioned, Mark Cunningham is no stranger to our podcast. He's been on before. And as we mentioned, he's the founder and the CEO of the Achieve Institute. He's spent years helping businesses develop high performance cultures through innovative incentive structures, leadership development, and organizational transformation. As we know, Mark believes that companies don't have to choose between financial success and social impact, right? You can have both. In fact, purpose-driven businesses often outperform their competitors by fostering strong employee engagement, customer loyalty, and long-term sustainability. So Mark, we're super excited to continue the conversation today. Welcome back to our show.
Thanks for having me back. I really enjoyed the last time as well. So
we're looking forward to your insights, again this time. So Mark, maybe let's start off just maybe to set the scene a little bit. How has your thinking evolved in terms of being able to balance that profit, with still achieving a purpose, maybe even since our last conversation?
Yeah, I think it's evolved, but it's also continually been validated in a way. So it's almost one of those things where you believe something and then you see more of it and you believe it more and more, as kind of the way I'd like to kind of speak to it is that one of the things that we see and we look at is high performing people, teams, and organizations. Our last conversation, I talked about these little secrets that are habits and practices that really unlock performance and results. But one of the major ingredients of high performance is character, which is what you make of and how you think and work. And that works for people, but most importantly, it works for organizations. And what we show and see every day is when those things are working in your favor, it absolutely gives you a competitive advantage. And that's as a company, but it does work down to the individual level. But one of the things we've observed over and over again is companies are just like big people. They have the same moving traits. They have the same type of qualities. And so what you're going to see about, that behavior of human beings is that when you have a stronger purpose, you're more effective. You have a better life. You get better outcomes over time and sustainability. Now, in short term, you can cut corners. But just like in life as people, you pay for it later, and so do companies. So what we see, it really validates that having a strong purpose, really does make you stronger, makes your organization stronger.
The technical debt eventually catches up to you for sure. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
One of the things you're saying there was interesting. Is that, yeah, you're talking about companies as people. A lot of times we see them almost as machines, right? And then we want to kind of move away from machines to like these more living organisms, right? I love that.
And to your point, Mark, I mean, last time we spoke, we spent a lot of time talking about habits for higher performance. And you said something interesting about character today. And there is a growing body of research that actually suggests that businesses with a clear social purpose, so we could call that really the character of the company, right, tend to outperform those that focus solely on profits. For example, there was a study in 2020 done by the Harvard Business Review that found that companies with strong purpose, they saw a 10% higher revenue growth compared to their peers that didn't. So why do you think purpose is such a competitive advantage in today's business landscape? Because we talk about the business and the impact on people, but it sounds like it's also a competitive advantage. And do you think there's a sort of a disconnect in people in businesses understanding that?
Yeah, Tulio. So one of the things that we look at is what's optimal, not what's wrong, and how do you fix it. And what we focus on is, hey, when you're running optimally, what's happening, what's in play. A lot of organizations, without knowing it, fall more into a survival mode, and they're just trying to get to the next quarter or the next year, and that's, you just keep surviving, but it's not optimal. When you really look back and look at things and say, wait a minute, what's optimal? You're going to start seeing that having a strong purpose is better than not having a strong purpose as an organization. It's actually going to help drive better decisions. It's actually going to create a better experience for your employees. It's going to drive better decision-making, long-term, short-term. So it is a fundamental part of what drives how people think and work every day. People just don't realize it. And we use the analogy when we talked about habits. We look at two things that drive behavior. Habits are like practices. There's things you do every day. We use the analogy of that's like how you drive your car. And if you drive your car better, you get more out of the same car. But if the car is that operating framework, culture, environment, character, you can upgrade the car, which makes the car fundamentally better, so you're driving a better car. And if you have two companies doing similar things and one has a really strong purpose and the other doesn't, the one with that strong purpose is going to outperform over time the company that doesn't, because it helps drive and guide decision-making. And not only that, it actually engages the people inside differently. So this is just the mechanics of performance. And it's one of those things, hey, if you have it, it's better than not having it. I'm not saying every company does it well, because obviously that's not the case, but just like people, we need to keep getting a little better and a little better.
Yeah, let's talk about the people side on that a little bit. So there was a Deloitte study that showed that purpose-driven companies experience 40% higher levels of workforce retention compared to those that don't focus on purpose. So from your experience, how does purpose and mission influence its ability to attract and retain the top talent?
Yeah, so Stephen, the interesting thing that what people just focused on were what were the results? What are the results that we're driving, that the business is driving? And that was whether you won or lost. The problem is, and that's evolved, and now everyone knows you need to have a positive customer experience, employee experience at the same time. And that isn't just the result, it's how did people feel about the result? And that is a very important piece of this puzzle that was missing, but everyone knows it now through NPS and engagement. All of it shows that when people are engaged, they work more effectively. So there's a profit component to this. One of the things that drives the experience of people inside of a company is its operating framework, which culture, attitude, mindset. One of the parts that makes that up is purpose. So that's why when you have a stronger purpose inside of an organization, the people inside of that organization feel more connected to that organization, feel more engaged, feel more bought in. When people feel that way, they work harder. they do a better job, they go that extra mile. So it's mechanics at the end of the day of that, having that piece of your character working for you helps you tap into a higher level of productivity than if you really don't have a strong purpose. Ironically, organizations that are out there that it's not that they don't have a purpose, it just may not be a strong purpose that's serving them. And that's where we don't say you don't have a purpose. We say, do you have a strong enough purpose? Because you can have a purpose to pay the bills, and then you go out and work to pay the bills.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the key word you said, like probably 5 times in there, and it's related to that purpose, is you said the word feel. And I think, and we know on the marketing side and from our empathetic approach on marketing, it's like, how does something make you feel is so important. And I think that's kind of what you're maybe getting at a little bit with that purpose, right? Is you could have a purpose of, we want to increase shareholder value, or we want, increase profit or whatever. Well, how's that make the average person feel? It's, not so inspiring as they might think.
I like what you said, Mark. It's kind of like this idea of like not making a choice is a choice. So the fact that you haven't stated a purpose doesn't mean you don't have one. It just may not be very effective because you didn't state one that's meaningful. It's interesting.
Yeah. And we're already, when we work with organizations, the car's already moving, Tulio. What we're doing is looking ways to upgrade the car while it's moving. And we do that with teams and individuals. And the point is like, hey, we're missing a purpose that's energizing and motivating. We have one that's a little kind of not motivating, which is, I want to get through the day. Like there's people that their goal is to get through the day, and that's their purpose, and they show up. And listen, I feel for that. But what I get people to get is that's not you being your best. And that's a powerful thing, is to get underneath. How do we create a purpose that because guess what? In work, there's times where things get hard. And when things get hard, if you don't have that strong purpose, what makes you overcome? What gives you that resilience to push through? And that's being connected to something that's bigger than yourself and really having a powerful purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and over my lifetime, for example, I've seen an organization like Microsoft, right, that had a very strong purpose early on in, the Bill Gates era, where they wanted, he wanted to put a computer on every desk, right? So it was about democratizing compute. Yeah. And then it sort of seemed like that purpose was achieved at one point. Bill left and Ballmer took over, and you could see at that point, the difficulty that Microsoft was really facing. They lost their way, and it became much more about the numbers. And then now you see this return, with Nadella at the helm, again, going back to that purpose that's so important. Obviously, the culture has changed a lot. Under Nadella, it's a much more vulnerable and caring type of culture. But it is interesting, right? You have a real life example that we've all lived through in the recent decades there. So, Mark, maybe another aspect that gets talked about, and I think you were touching on it a little bit, was around the employee behavior component, and then even your customers, right? So, with this key area around customer behavior. In fact, there was some research that was done recently by Accenture that was saying that about 63% of global consumers prefer to buy from a brand that has purpose, behind it and is making a real impact. So, how do businesses successfully integrate the social responsibility or that planet component of their purpose into their brand story, so that it then resonates with their consumers? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the key point is that customer experience is so critical. And Stephen was just talking about it, which is not what did you give me, but how did it make me feel?
Yeah.
And if you're not resonating with your customers and someone else is, they're going to choose the organization that really they feel connected to, and they feel a sense of weight. They're stand for what I stand. They believe, they're doing what's right. or, that little connection piece gives you that different experience. And people today are more aware of that than ever. We're more connected to these things than ever. So there's more information. So that's just part of the reality of today's customer, but also like even today's employees. They're not just looking for a job. They're looking for a company that they feel like they fit in. So you can't get away from it. You can't avoid it because it's actually just part of reality. But once you recognize it, you can turn it into a real advantage that's only a net positive.
Yeah, I always love the expression, without a customer, I don't have a company. Right? And so if customers are going this route, your eventuality is only going to be so long down the road, right?
Absolutely.
So, Mark, we've got a question from the audience. And how do you ensure that purpose-driven decisions remain sustainable over time? Not sure who it's from. Thank you on YouTube. So, good question. What are your thoughts on that?
Very good question. So I actually tie purpose as one big piece of what makes up your culture and that environment that you have. There's actually another one that's critical too, which is your identity. One is who are you, and the other is why do you do what you do? And you actually have to answer both as you're in this process, because if I don't know who I am, it's hard to say this is my purpose. The irony is once you know who you are, you then have to define why do I do what I do? And Tulio, to answer the question is really to say first, answer those questions. And answer those questions is who are we? And then why do we do what we do? And what you want to find, remember I said it already exists. There's probably an identity in there that's not serving you too, just like there's a purpose that may not be inspiring, right? So getting that strong identity is important, but then getting a strong purpose, then you run things through that filter. Hey, if we're living up to this is who we are and this is why we do things, what are we doing in these different circumstances? And what that does, it helps you define what you say yes to and what you say no to on an ongoing basis. So you don't create a list of we only do this and we don't do that because the world evolves too fast. What you want to have is a very strong filter in which you process those decisions. The other thing you need to get good at is saying, what does that look like in our reality? So it gets down to where you work every day. What do we say yes to? What do we say no to? And that helps you start to say, and here's what that looks like in the real world. Because this isn't theoretical. It actually, at the end of the day, will drive your choices every day. Companies have this on the background. They need to make it a little stronger. And that's something that we do with teams as we help in organizations. We help them strengthen this part of kind of their own culture and environment. That's where we upgrade that part of the car, if you will.
Great. Thank you for the question. Please keep them coming. So I want to shift gears a little bit, talking about how incentives can be used to drive impact. So, in your work, you focus on building high performance cultures, and then influencing incentive structures plays a role in this as an example. So what are some of the biggest mistakes companies make when they try to integrate purpose into their incentive programs?
Yeah, really important here. What we do is we increase organizations' awareness because before they work with us, they'll say, we're going to incentivize results because that's what we're here to drive, our results. So they'd be maybe just incentivizing results. And what we get them aware of is you can get results the right way and the wrong way. So you may be rewarding bad behavior without knowing it. Because you're
like most companies out there, it feels like
all day, right? It happens
all day, every day.
Yeah, but you pay for it later. See, if you're doing things the wrong way, it catches up to you. But what we do is increase that awareness of okay, because it's what you incentivize, what you measure, but also what you punish, and what you recognize. And what we get people to get is see the whole performance equation. You start realizing wait, we have to make sure we're incentivizing the right behaviors that are driving the results we want. So you're going after not just results and behaviors. And an example of this, years ago, I worked with a group, sales, right? Hardcore sales, got to hit that growth number. And what were they doing? They were just recognizing their top performers. That's who was recognized. But what that did, though, is if you have a large sales organization, not everyone has the same talent and ability. They wanted to create an environment where everyone showed up and did their best and that really gave everything they had. Well, if I have a little less ability and someone has a better market, I may never get that kind of recognition. But what we outlined for them is showed them that, hey, if your people are getting better and better, they're giving you everything they have. So what they did is they kept recognizing the tops, but they also started recognizing where growth existed and improvement existed. And then all of a sudden, everyone can grow, everyone can improve, everyone can do their best. So the whole point of it was, yeah, you got to do the basics of, hey, where are our metrics? But an underlying behavioral thing, they realize, wait, if someone keeps improving, we need to recognize that because we want that behavior across our whole organization. Because if I only recognize the top 5%, everyone knows 95% of the results, you're going to generally, if you're either always in it or not in it. But if you could be back in that bottom third, but you just improved by 25%, now you're recognizing a stronger behavior, which is growth and improvement.
Yeah, let's talk about those metrics just a little bit. I mean, from your experience, what are some of the most effective ways companies kind of measure the ROI of those purpose-driven initiatives?
Well, that's a good question. And what people will do will weave in, if they want more collaboration, they have to put that into what they're measuring and how they're rewarding. So part of, at the end of the year, is there good cross-functional teaming? Is that in how people are recognized or incentivized or rewarded? So, that's where once they become aware, wait a minute, we're creating the silos we're living in. We need to start rewarding cross-collaboration because we're actually creating the silos we're complaining about. And because we're not measuring, we're not recognizing, rewarding that behavior that might be a teamwork thing where everyone won because we shared. And my scoreboard might not have been as strong, but it's like, that's why I say we increase awareness and then people change because they're the ones that set up those agreements, those performance agreements and those reward structure. We have a thing we use around, you have to be careful of what you recognize. And what a lot of times what's recognized is what's wrong, not what's right. And what I mean by recognition is there's the positive recognition, but also if we always put our attention on what's wrong, people are really good at what's not to do. And what we get leaders to get is you've got to go find where it's right so people know what good is so they can go do it. You'd be amazed how often organizations, they're good at the punitive, don't do this, don't do that. But what they haven't done is say, and by the way, here's what good looks like. So it's like, you got to go recognize those winning behaviors.
Yeah, and you even have to do that even more than Absolutely. The other side of the equation, right? You've got to recognize it 5 times versus the one negative in there, just because we tend to dwell on that one problem area.
Yeah, and we have a rule: if you can't see it, you can't do it. So if I ask someone to go do something, but they don't know what it looks like, they haven't seen their neighbor do it, you haven't shown them doing it. We talk about modeling first. So the hard part for leaders is they got to model first what it is we're talking about. So we always start with leadership, because without knowing it, what you model translates through an organization. And that's where it always starts with leadership. As leaders start to realize the power of their reactions and actions, they start realizing, wait, I need to look at myself first, but then I've got to go down into the organization and be able to articulate, here's what I'm looking for. But it starts by not saying you do it. It's like, you've got to do it first. And that's why leadership is so important, but it's also hard. You've got to walk the walk.
Yes. Indeed.
Yeah, I love this discussion because it's not hard, right? I mean, all of us, I think, on the show are parents, right? And you just think about, being a parent, our kids are so observant. They look at our example. You got to model the behavior that you want. And the same thing, right? What you reward maybe in your kids' behavior is what, gets sort of, constituted. But I love that point, Mark, about being the model that you want to have in your organization. And it's not hard, right? We're not talking about landing a person on the moon here. There are though maybe some challenges that some organizations do face when it comes to moving in this direction, right? It's been already well documented that being purpose driven, being socially responsible, having an impact on your people and the planet are all good for organizations, right? I think some businesses, they understand that, but yet they're struggling, Mark, with something. Either it's the leaders can't execute. So what do you do? What do you see, and maybe with your organization as well, some of the common barriers that companies just can't overcome, and then how do they overcome them?
Yeah, it's a bit of one. It's habit. Like going back to what is they do what they do because it's what they've always done. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we work to do is help people create new ways of thinking and working, and that takes a little bit of work and awareness. But that is part of this. Is there is another way. It isn't. You don't have to just keep doing the same thing. But ironically, survival is hard and thriving is much easier. So what people have is they have it backwards. They think to do more, it's got to be harder. But actually, when you create a cohesive team in an organization, I use the car analogy, now you have all 8 cylinders working instead of just 2 or 3. Yeah. And all of us, so now there is a direct tie to higher level of results but it's about awareness. And that is part of this is, hey, let's get you aware of. And I use that example of, hey, we're just going to go talk about the results on Thursday because that's a sales meeting, right? Every week we're going to talk about that. So what does that tell everyone? The only thing that matters is that, okay? Yeah. Because that's what I'm recognizing. That's what I'm focusing on. All right. And what I'm not doing is going upstream to what are the behaviors I want to have in my organization that'll drive a higher level of results. And that's where we go, Mike, we do something called model, build, recognize, inspect. So I've got a model. So if I say, doing things right up front matters, I've got to model it first. I can't just say it. But then when I'm in a meeting, if I just go and inspect for the result, I'm modeling that behavior. So I'm literally, I'm setting that tone. You just said something really important. It's not that hard. Once you change, the organization changes with you if you're a leader. Yeah. So you have so much power that you don't realize that there's a whole bunch of people that are following underneath. It's just looking at different levers to pull to drive that behavior. If you become aware of different ways of thinking and working, then you get more out of the same group of people. And that then you have an inspired team versus, oh no, we've got to survive. And you're in that survival mode and reactive mode, which is, it's hard, it's tiring. You survive, but that is far from really optimizing. And that's why we always start with what's optimal. Like when we're really firing on all cylinders, what does that look like? And just to finish the model, you got to start with you. So then we go to build. And build is, I've got to go and say, okay, Mike, you work with me. You're not doing it this way. Let's talk about what that would look like. And I'm just doing what I know. If I can't see something different, I'm going to keep doing it, okay? The way I always did it. That's building. And it's not that hard, but it's just going through and say, here's the way we've done it, but here's the way, if we were really doing it the right way, here's what it would look like. Then we got to catch people doing it right, and that's recognizing it. And eventually we can go inspect for it. So then we can say, show me how you're living our purpose. Show me how you are truly existing the way we said we want to as an organization.
I love that saying, surviving is hard, thriving is easy. I'm stealing that, Mark. I love it. Now, speaking of habits, you've spoken about modeling the right habits, which has an impact on the organization. We have a question that's very timely from the audience on YouTube again. Have you noticed a shift in consumer behavior towards supporting companies that prioritize social impact? We talked about behaviors internal to the organization. This is a great question about how does that impact behavior outside of the organization, or especially with consumers?
Yeah, I think it's as we said, that it's all connected, that people are more and more aware, especially the generation shift is moving towards, this is part of the decision making, is not, it's like where I spend my dollars. I want to make sure it's aligned with the way I think and the way I believe and things like that. And people recognize they get to make those choices. Just like when they pick companies now, they're interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them in terms of, hey, do I feel like I want to work here? Is this going to feel right? Consumers are doing the same thing. And one of the things I think, though, that organizations really, I think that'll serve them is really being for things, not against things. It's really powerful that we have something we use. It's like if I'm for sustainability, then who's against that? The alternative is we're not sustainable. Like that's a hard thing to be against. And the reason I say is that puts you in that high ground of like, okay, we're for, it's not the way and the how, but this is what we're about and staying for. And then we make different choices on what that looks like. But being for things is really empowering. And then people resonate. Oh, wait, you're aligned with, I'm for that too. And you can have that agreement and that alignment. And as Stephen mentioned earlier, then the customer feels a sense of connection and alignment with the organization, not just on the product, but how the company itself makes them feel. And whether you know it or not, that happens, as you guys know in marketing. You get an experience from a company, which is okay. And it could be, and it could be whether it's electronics, it could be, you go to a restaurant, you get a feeling. It's all just part of that human experience.
Yeah.
You mentioned that higher ground, and it just got me thinking. I mean, love is always that higher ground, right? And that's why we're talking about, build love into scalable systems. It's always going to help you lead to that higher ground. And, ultimately that's going to help you, like we talked about, connect and have people feel what we want them to feel and see themselves in your company the way they want to be seen.
Yeah.
And I wanted to add, you also said something that consumers are wanting this. And in fact, there's a study that says 78% of Americans actually expect small businesses to contribute to social impact. And this begs the question, because a lot of people think this is only for big companies, large corporations. They need to be involved with this. But the study shows that actually majority of people want small business to make an impact, to contribute. So what advice do you have for smaller companies that maybe think this is, for the big guys? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. So Julia, if you remember what I said earlier, the way I look through the lens is, companies are like people. They're just big people, and big companies are like really, really big people. They actually have the same exact mechanisms of identity, and we have things, identity, worldview, beliefs, and then purpose, and down to that individual. And the premise here, I would even say smaller companies may need it more at the end of the day. And the reason being is that, as you're in a small organization, you're always going to have those challenges. And just having that part of that character being, who are we? Why do we do what we do every day? That's just going to serve you. It's not going to work against you. It's going to work for you. And that it will help a small organization go through the ups and downs, just like we talked about. When you have a stronger purpose, it helps you navigate through when things are more difficult. And then you see yourself as part of the community, because we are, whether we like it or not, we are part of the community. We are. So it's like, how are you being a positive impact in that community, whatever that community is, does depend on these elements, whether they're there working for you or against you. So I would always say, get those things working for you, and it can only be a benefit.
Yeah.
Mark,
Momentum, right? The benefit of momentum there. Yeah, for sure. So Mark, I have a couple of questions for you about purpose. The one of them is I like to ask all of our guests is, if you could, for our listeners, in a soundbite, succinct way, if you can answer it that way, why is purpose important in business, would you say?
Yeah. Purpose just answers the simple question is, why do we do what we do every day? It's why we use the analogy of the car. Mm-hmm. And it's great that we have a truck or a Ferrari or a bus, but one day you have to answer, why are we driving it in the first place?
Yeah.
And having that strong answer gives you more horsepower, than it'll tap into horsepower that you didn't realize was there.
Yeah. And get those other cylinders going, right? For sure. And then my other question about purpose is for the leaders that are on, listening to us, that are having difficulty with this or don't know where to start when it comes to purpose. What would you say the first step is for them?
Yeah, as I said earlier, first step first is, who are we? Who are we? And then why do we do what we do? And is it compelling? And I'm going to give a personal example, Mike. I've been doing what I do now for close to 30 years, but my business I started 25 years ago. About 15, 18 years ago, I was traveling, still do, traveling all the time. As you know, that can get a little tired. You got another gate, another security, shoes off back then, and it can wear on you. And truthfully, it was at that time, it was really tiring me out. And then I clicked into this part of the program. Actually, it was around 2008, 2009. I really started to understand purpose better. And actually what happened is, I realized what was happening is, I was in line again at the airport. I was in another taxi. I was in another this. Once I rechecked what I was doing, I realized my job is to help people have a better experience in their lives. Mm-hmm. And what I realized is, when I was no longer standing in line at the airport, I was helping people change their lives for the better. So it made standing in the airport at the line, this was easy. So the same act all of a sudden was framed very differently, and it's never bothered me since. And people are like, doesn't it bother you? I'm like, no, it doesn't. Because that's my purpose, is to go and do that. And if I don't get on a plane, I can't do that.
Yeah, for sure.
I always love hearing
perspective changes it. You went from me to we kind of a thing. Yeah.
I always love hearing these stories, because they're so relatable to people, because we're always viewing things in this one way. And sometimes it's just that slight little shift, that slight paradigm shift that suddenly happens. And now it's like, oh, you've recharged your battery completely. Yep. And it's some universal power source you're tapping into now, where you're not getting drained anymore. It's really because it's motivated by love, which is, it's like this endless resource in a way that you can tap into. But it's so fascinating to me just to see when it's just this small little twist of something, like Mike said, thinking more in service to others, right? Where suddenly it's like, oh, now I see this entirely different. And now I'm no longer, one of those, the 85% out of there that's just getting beat down every day and can't wait to get, back home and all that. You're on your mission. Marcus, as we look ahead, what do you see as far as the biggest trends shaping the future of purpose-driven business?
Well, I think it's needed more than ever right now. There's so much change and transition. You throw in AI. What's the purpose of AI? Why are we using it? How are we using it? If you use it for good, it could be really good. If people that are using it are, have a not as great a purpose, they need, it's going to have not as good outcomes. And so I think that, the realization that, hey, we need to keep elevating the way we think and work. We have to do that. And I think the companies that do that will be stronger over time for sure. But I think it's more needed now than ever. And people are feeling more and more worn out. And Stephen, you just said it, like you tap into a new gear that's always there. But that's why we use the car analogy. You find 200 more horsepower. You're not driving the engine differently. And that's why I think some companies will do it better than others, and that will be where, but that will be drawn to customers, and people will want to go work with those organizations.
Mark, before we wrap up, we sometimes ask this question, and we've already asked you the question we usually asked last time you're on. So I'm going to adjust it a little bit. Why do you think companies should adopt love in business? Yeah.
I love the question, and I'm gonna take a different path this time than the last time for sure. One of the big things that we do, everything we do is anchored in something we call left-right column. And left column is when you're stuck, frustrated, and overwhelmed. Right column is when you're energized, motivated, but most importantly, connected, affinity, right? Left column, alone, disconnected. And interestingly, Stephen, what happens when you go from a weak purpose, you're in the left column. When you have a strong purpose, you connect to that unending source of energy, which is right column, which is filled with love, connection, and affinity, loving what you do, love your neighbor, things like that. So it taps into a whole different level of performance. And that's why we talked about what's optimal, because I can get by being disconnected. It's just not very fun. It's a very miserable experience. So that's the beauty of this, is tying productivity to a better experience.
Beautiful.
Nice.
Great way to wrap up the show. Mark, it's been a great pleasure having you on. Again, I loved the combination last time talking about habits and the importance of those, then now character and culture. It's a really good combo. Thank you for your insights as well on the purpose-driven, leadership that has to take place and really become, part of a business strategy, as we could say. But if our listeners want to learn a little bit more about you and also the Achieve Institute, where should they go? Where can they find you?
Yeah, our website, achieveinst.com, is a good place to find out about us, and go follow us on LinkedIn. And those are kind of probably two of the best places. And yeah, much appreciate the time, and always enjoy the discussion with you all.
Yep. Thank you, Mark. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If today's discussion inspired you, be sure to subscribe and share this episode, and give us some 5-star reviews out there. Those help too. Until next time, keep leading with purpose and impact.